The morning Ellie Morgan arrived at Pinewood Elementary, she moved through the colorful hallways like just another kindergarten teacher, which according to her modest credentials and unassuming appearance, she absolutely was. No one could have guessed that behind her gentle smile and cardigan sweater lay the mind of someone who had once been among the military's most elite counter-snipers, capable of making impossible shots under pressure that would determine whether diplomats lived or died. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The school buzzed with the familiar chaos of the first day back after spring break. Children darted between classrooms, their excited voices echoing off walls decorated with alphabet charts and construction paper art. Teachers clustered in small groups, comparing lesson plans and sharing stories of vacation adventures. Principal Harris moved confidently through the crowd, her tailored suit and brisk stride projecting the authority of someone who managed the educational equivalent of a small corporation. Ellie carried a simple tote bag filled with supplies for her classroom, no indication of her former life visible in her casual attire or gentle demeanor. Her teacher ID badge read Ms. Morgan Kindergarten in plain letters that suggested nothing beyond ordinary credentials, the kind of identification worn by thousands of elementary school teachers across the country, people whose greatest daily challenge was supposed to be managing finger painting sessions and teaching the basics of addition. Around her, the real educational heavyweights moved with practiced confidence. Department heads carried tablets displaying complex curriculum plans. Specialized instructors discussed advanced teaching methodologies, their conversations peppered with jargon from the latest educational research. District coordinators reviewed performance metrics with the focused intensity of people accustomed to measuring success in quantifiable outcomes. At the center of it all, the newly renovated auditorium was being prepared for a special presentation later that week. The governor would be visiting to announce a major education initiative, with state officials, school board members, and local dignitaries all scheduled to attend. Security personnel were already conducting preliminary checks, their earpieces and serious expressions adding an unusual element to the otherwise cheerful elementary school environment. Ellie had been teaching kindergarten for 4 years now, guiding young minds through their first encounters with formal education, helping them develop the fundamental skills that would serve as building blocks for all future learning. Steady, meaningful work that allowed her to make a difference while maintaining the quiet, ordinary life she'd created for herself after leaving her previous career behind. Her invitation to participate in the governor's education initiative came through the standard channels, a district-wide email seeking teachers willing to showcase their classrooms during the upcoming visit. She wasn't expected to speak, wasn't expected to participate in any meaningful way. She was there to provide the appropriate backdrop of educational authenticity, while important people made important announcements. But observing details that others missed was something Ellie had always excelled at. She paused near the security checkpoint being installed at the main entrance, her trained eye catching something that made her tilt her head slightly. The placement of the scanning equipment created a blind spot in the coverage area, a vulnerability that would be invisible to anyone who hadn't spent years assessing tactical positions and security perimeters. "You've got a gap in the security coverage," she said quietly to the technician adjusting the equipment. "Left side of the entrance. Anyone coming through there would be partially obscured." The technician, a polished young man named Jason, looked up with raised eyebrows. "Thanks, we'll make sure the security team knows about it." His tone carried the kind of dismissive politeness reserved for people who clearly didn't understand what they were looking at. A few administrators nearby exchanged glances, their expressions showing barely concealed amusement. One of them, the vice principal David Mitchell, with his perpetually loosened tie and coffee-stained travel mug, smirked. Teacher's lounge is down the hallway. Ms. Morgan, I believe they just put out fresh muffins if that's what you're really interested in. Ellie felt the familiar weight of assumption settling around her. The quiet kindergarten teacher with the simple tote bag and sensible shoes. The one who should stick to alphabet songs and colorful counting blocks. Someone nearby took a photo. For the school newsletter, probably to showcase staff involvement in preparations for the governor's visit. Another began recording a video clip for the district's social media account, waiting for her to either become flustered by the attention or apologize for speaking up. She did neither. Ellie simply nodded, her expression unreadable, and moved toward her classroom. Behind her, the security scanner remained in its problematic position, the same gap she'd identified still glaringly obvious to her trained eye. No one else seemed concerned. The dismissal stung, but it wasn't new. In her 4 years of teaching, Ellie had grown accustomed to being underestimated. The kindergarten teacher whose curriculum ideas were considered cute rather than innovative. The young woman whose security concerns were dismissed as unnecessary anxiety. The faculty member invited to district planning sessions, but never expected to contribute meaningful input. What they didn't know, what her modest credentials and simple tote bag couldn't tell them, was that 8 years ago, she'd been the one protecting high-value targets in conflict zones they'd only seen on the news. The one neutralizing threats from distances that most marksmen would consider impossible. The one who had developed techniques that were still being taught to special operations teams around the world. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story, but that was before her name had been redacted from mission reports. Before her unit insignia had been tucked away in a box she rarely opened. Before she'd chosen to leave that life behind for reasons that were simultaneously deeply personal and extensively classified. Now she was just Ms. Morgan, the kindergarten teacher who decorated her classroom with handprints and spent her days teaching 5-year-olds how to tie their shoes and share toys appropriately. As she walked toward her classroom, following the hallway that curved around to the eastern wing of the building, she pulled out her personal phone and checked the local news. Something had been nagging at her since she'd arrived, a pattern in the security preparations that reminded her of something she'd seen before, something that didn't quite align with the stated purpose of the governor's visit. The spring breeze drifted through the open windows as she found a quiet moment before her students would arrive. From here, she could see the school's main entrance where additional security equipment was being installed for the upcoming event. The building sat silent except for the distant sounds of maintenance staff and administration making final preparations. Ellie had taught in classrooms like this one for 4 years now. Bright, colorful spaces designed to engage young minds and spark curiosity. Her room responded to her touch, reflecting her philosophy that education should be both structured and joyful. That mission hadn't started with anxiety or fear, just a slow realization that she could make a different kind of difference in the world, one child at a time. Her hand found the small scar on her left shoulder, barely visible beneath her cardigan. The raised tissue was a reminder of the last mission, the one that had made her question everything about the path she'd chosen. No one asked about the scar anymore. She'd stopped telling that story, even the heavily edited version she'd created for civilian ears. But today, something felt different. The security gap she'd spotted wasn't random. The unusual level of preparation for what should have been a straightforward political event seemed excessive. And the feeling building in her chest, the same instinct that had guided her through dozens of high-risk operations, was telling her that this school visit was about to become something more complicated than a standard photo opportunity. Ellie checked her watch. Classes would begin in 30 minutes. She had time to observe, to analyze, to understand what was really happening here. She had time to be the quiet kindergarten teacher they expected her to be. Unless, of course, being quiet was no longer an option. As she arranged colorful counting blocks on each table, the hallway carried the distant sound of excited children beginning to arrive. The regular school day was about to begin, and Ellie Morgan, the woman they'd dismissed as just another kindergarten teacher, was about to discover that some instincts never fade, no matter how much time passes or how far. You try to run from who you used to be. The question was, when the moment came, would she choose to stay silent, or would she remember what it felt like to look through a scope, where clarity of purpose and precision of action meant the difference between life and death? Ellie's classroom hummed with the controlled chaos that only 25 kindergartners could create. Bright paper crafts hung from the ceiling, educational posters covered the walls, and the morning sunshine streamed through windows decorated with student artwork. Her students were engaged in center activities, some building structures with blocks, others practicing letters with magnetic boards, a few exploring the small classroom library. She moved among them with the patient grace of someone who understood that teaching 5-year-olds required equal parts structure and flexibility. To anyone observing, she appeared to be exactly what her credentials claimed, a dedicated kindergarten teacher with a natural gift for connecting with young children. "Ms. Morgan, look what I made," called Lily, a bright-eyed girl with unruly curls, holding up a construction paper creation. "That's wonderful, Lily," Ellie responded, kneeling down to examine the colorful artwork. "Tell me about the colors you chose." As Lily launched into an elaborate explanation of her artistic decisions, Ellie's attention remained divided. Part of her was fully present with her student, asking questions and offering encouragement. But another part, the part she'd spent 4 years carefully suppressing, continued scanning her surroundings, noticing details that seemed increasingly out of place. Through her classroom window, she could see additional security personnel arriving, their movements displaying a level of coordination that seemed excessive for a routine gubernatorial visit. Their positioning around the building followed standard protection protocols, but with subtle variations that suggested preparation for something beyond a simple public appearance. The classroom phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was Amanda, the school secretary, her voice carrying the forced cheerfulness of someone delivering unwelcome news. "Ms. Morgan, Principal Harris is asking all teachers to attend a brief security briefing during lunch period. Apparently, there's been a change to the governor's visit schedule." "Did she mention what kind of change?" Ellie asked, keeping her tone casual while watching a security team conducting what appeared to be a perimeter check of the playground. "Just that the governor's bringing additional guests, some foreign education delegates or something. They're updating security protocols." The secretary lowered her voice slightly. "Between us, it seems like overkill for a school visit, doesn't it?" "It does seem unusual," Ellie agreed, thanking Amanda before hanging up. Additional guests, foreign delegates, increased security. The pattern was becoming clearer, and it matched briefings she'd received years ago when preparing for high-risk protection details. This wasn't just a routine school visit anymore. It was evolving into something that might require the skills she'd left behind. During lunch period, Ellie joined her colleagues in the staff room where Principal Harris stood at the front, flanked by a serious-looking man in a dark suit who introduced himself as Agent Reynolds from the governor's security detail. "As some of you may have heard," Principal Harris began, "the governor's visit has expanded to include a delegation of international education ministers. This is an incredible opportunity for Pinewood Elementary to showcase our programs on a global stage." Agent Reynolds stepped forward, his expression professionally neutral. "With the addition of international dignitaries, security protocols have been enhanced. All staff will need updated credentials. The auditorium will be secured 24 hours before the event and will be conducting regular sweeps of the building." Ellie listened carefully, noting the terminology Reynolds used, not the language of someone protecting a routine political event, but the precise phrasing of someone preparing for a high-value multi-target security operation. When Reynolds displayed a diagram of the updated security perimeter, Ellie noticed the same gap she'd identified earlier, now incorporated into the formal security plan. The blind spot hadn't been fixed. It had been institutionalized. "Are there any questions?" Reynolds asked, scanning the room. Ellie raised her hand. "The security position at the main entrance still has a coverage gap on the left approach. Anyone monitoring from that position won't have clear sight lines to the eastern corner of the building." The room fell silent. Reynolds stared at her with a mixture of surprise and suspicion. "The security arrangements have been thoroughly vetted by professionals, Miss Morgan, Ellie Morgan." "Kindergarten," she replied evenly. "And I'm just pointing out what appears to be a vulnerability in the coverage plan." David Mitchell, the vice principal who had dismissed her earlier, laughed softly. "Ellie's been watching too many spy movies, I think. Maybe stick to finger painting and leave security to the professionals?" Several teachers chuckled nervously. Reynolds offered a thin smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I appreciate your concern, Ms. Morgan, but I assure you, our security arrangements are more than adequate." Ellie nodded, her face betraying nothing of the alarm bells ringing in her mind. The dismissal was exactly what she expected. What civilian would question a professional security assessment? But she knew what she had seen, and more importantly, she recognized the pattern emerging around this supposedly routine school event. After the meeting, she returned to her empty classroom and pulled out her personal laptop. The kindergartners were at music class, giving her 15 minutes of uninterrupted time. She began researching the governor's recent activities and the international education delegation that would be joining him. What she found sent a chill down her spine. Delegation included ministers from 3 countries, currently experiencing significant political tensions. Their joint appearance had not been publicly announced, suggesting an attempt to keep the meeting low profile. Yet the chosen venue was an elementary school, an unusual location for sensitive international discussions. It matched a pattern she'd seen during her previous career, using seemingly innocent public events as cover for high-level diplomatic meetings, particularly when those meetings needed to happen away from media scrutiny and traditional security environments. She closed her laptop as her students began returning from music class, their cheerful voices filling the hallway. For the rest of the afternoon, Ellie taught letters and numbers, managed snack time, and helped resolve the minor crises that populated a kindergartner's day. To anyone watching, she was completely focused on her students. But her mind was elsewhere, calculating angles and assessing risks, reviewing protocols and contingency plans that she hadn't thought about in years. After school, when the building had emptied of children and most of the staff had departed, Ellie found herself drawn back to the auditorium where the event would take place. Security personnel were installing additional equipment, including metal detectors and screening stations. She observed from a distance, noting positioning and procedures with the experienced eye of someone who had once been responsible for protecting high-value targets from precisely the kind of threats these men were attempting to prevent. Checking out the preparations for the big day, Principal Harris appeared beside her, startling Ellie slightly, a rare occurrence for someone with her training. "Just curious about all the security," Ellie replied casually. "Seems extensive for an education announcement." Harris nodded, her expression suggesting she shared the sentiment. "Between us, I think there's more happening than they're telling." U.S. I overheard Agent Reynolds talking about diplomatic security protocols. Seems odd for a school visit, doesn't it? "Very odd," Ellie agreed, carefully maintaining her role as a simple kindergarten teacher while internally processing the confirmation of her suspicions. "Well, it's not our concern," Harris said with a sigh. "Our job is to make sure the school looks perfect and the children behave appropriately for the cameras." Speaking of which, your class will be positioned near the front, so please make sure they're prepared." Ellie nodded, promising to have her students ready for their moment in the spotlight. As Harris walked away, Ellie took one final look at the auditorium setup, mentally calculating angles and identifying potential vulnerabilities. With the practiced efficiency of someone who had spent years analyzing such spaces for very different reasons. That evening, as she drove home to her modest apartment, Ellie felt the weight of knowledge pressing down on her. What had begun as routine preparations for a political photo opportunity was clearly evolving into something more complex and potentially more dangerous. The security gaps she'd identified weren't just administrative oversights. They were tactical vulnerabilities that could be exploited by anyone who recognized them. Her apartment was simple but comfortable, deliberately ordinary in a way that helped her maintain the distance between who she had been and who she had chosen to become. Nothing in the neat living room or functional kitchen suggested that its occupant had once operated at the highest levels of military special operations. But behind a locked door in what appeared to be a simple home office was evidence of her former life. Not displayed openly like trophies or mementos, but secured away like the dangerous knowledge it represented. Ellie unlocked the door and entered the room, turning on a single lamp that cast soft light over a desk covered with student assignments waiting to be reviewed. She moved to the bookshelf and removed a collection of educational theory texts, revealing a small safe built into the wall behind them. The combination came to her fingers automatically, muscle memory that hadn't faded despite years of disuse. Inside the safe was a simple metal box containing the few items she had kept from her previous career, her service medals stored without their identifying documentation, a folded unit patch with its insignia deliberately obscured, and a small notebook filled with codes and calculations that would be meaningless to anyone who hadn't received the same specialized training she had. Beneath these items lay something else, a slim case containing the specialized tools of her former profession. Not weapons, but the precision instruments that had once allowed her to calculate distance, wind speed, and other environmental factors with extraordinary accuracy. Tools that had made her one of the most effective counter-snipers in the special operations community. She didn't remove the case, simply confirmed its presence before closing and relocking the safe. She hoped. She was wrong about the patterns she was seeing. Hoped that the governor's visit would be exactly what it appeared to be on the surface, a simple political event at an elementary school. But 8 years in the field had taught her to trust her instincts, and those instincts were telling her that something wasn't right. The security gaps, the unexpected international delegation, the excessive preparations combined with obvious vulnerabilities, it all suggested a situation developing in ways that the people around her couldn't recognize. Ellie returned to grading papers, marking kindergarten spelling attempts with encouraging stickers and gentle corrections. To anyone looking through her window, she appeared to be exactly what her credentials claimed, a dedicated teacher, preparing for another day of shaping young minds. But as she worked, part of her mind continued analyzing what she had observed, calculating probabilities and considering contingencies. Because some skills never fade, and some responsibilities never truly end, no matter how far you run or how thoroughly you reinvent yourself. The question wasn't whether something unusual was happening at Pinewood Elementary. The question was what she would do about it when the moment came, if it came, to choose between maintaining her carefully constructed new identity or drawing on the skills and knowledge of a past she had deliberately left behind. As she placed a gold star on a particularly creative student drawing, Ellie Morgan made a decision. Tomorrow she would dig deeper. Tomorrow she would find out exactly what was really happening at her school. Because if there was one thing her former career had taught her, it was that overlooking warning signs never ended well. And if there was one thing her current career had taught her, it was that she had a responsibility to protect the children in her care, no matter what that protection might require of her. The Security Operations Center inside Pinewood Elementary's administrative wing hummed with quiet efficiency 2 days before the governor's scheduled visit. Floor-to-ceiling monitors displayed live feeds from security cameras, while multiple computer stations showed building schematics and personnel assignments. Security staff moved with the confident precision of professionals who had handled similar operations many times before. Ellie observed it all from the edge of the room, ostensibly there to discuss her classroom's participation in the event. In reality, she was cataloging details that confirmed her growing suspicions. The equipment was military grade, far beyond what would be deployed for a routine political appearance. The personnel weren't standard protection detail officers, but specialized agents with the bearing and communication patterns of those trained for high-risk security operations. Principal Harris stood at the central console, her normally confident demeanor somewhat subdued as she discussed logistics with Agent Reynolds. The transformation of her elementary school into what amounted to a tactical command center seemed to have unsettled her professional composure. "Ms. Morgan," Harris called, noticing Ellie near the doorway. "Agent Reynolds has some questions about your classroom's position during the presentation." Ellie approached the main display where Reynolds was indicating a seating chart. His expression remained professionally neutral, but something in his eyes suggested he hadn't forgotten her comments about security vulnerabilities. "We've adjusted the positioning of the classes," he explained, pointing to the diagram. "Your kindergartners will now be seated at the back of the auditorium rather than the front." The change made no logical sense from an event planning perspective. Young children were typically positioned prominently during photo opportunities with politicians, but it made perfect sense if you were trying to minimize potential collateral exposure during a high-risk situation. "That's fine," Ellie replied evenly. "They'll actually be less restless if they're not right up front." Reynolds nodded without making eye contact, already turning his attention back to the security schematics. His body language screamed dismissal. The kindergarten teacher had received her instructions and was no longer relevant to the serious work being conducted. As Ellie turned to leave, she noticed a familiar pattern on one of the secondary monitors, a deployment diagram showing security positions around the building's perimeter. The gap she had identified earlier was still present, but now it appeared to be intentional rather than overlooked. A deliberate vulnerability in what was otherwise an exceptionally thorough security setup. That single detail transformed her concerns from general unease to specific alarm. In her former life, she had seen this exact pattern before, a security perimeter with one carefully engineered weak point, designed not as an oversight, but as a controlled access vector, a deliberate gap that could be monitored to catch someone attempting to exploit it. Or, in rarer and more disturbing cases, a gap left intentionally unmonitored to allow unauthorized access by someone inside the security operation itself. Ellie left the security center, her mind racing. The school hallways felt suddenly foreign, transformed from a place of learning into something more dangerous by the patterns she was recognizing. She needed more information, needed to understand exactly what was happening before deciding how to respond. She made her way to the school library, now empty of children and staff as preparations for the governor's visit had disrupted normal schedules. The library computers were connected to the school's network, which now included temporary connections to the security systems being installed throughout the building. Sitting at a computer in the corner with her back to the wall, a position chosen automatically from years of tactical awareness, Ellie accessed the school's online calendar system. Her teacher credentials gave her limited access, but she wasn't using those credentials anymore. Instead, her fingers moved across the keyboard with practiced efficiency, applying skills that had nothing to do with early childhood education. Within minutes, she had navigated past the basic security protocols, accessing scheduling information that confirmed her worst fears. The governor's visit wasn't just about education policy. It included a classified meeting with international representatives, using the elementary school as an unlikely and theoretically secure location for discussions that were deliberately being kept off official channels. But something else caught her attention, an anomaly in the security scheduling that made her blood run cold. There was a 3-minute window during the event when the eastern entrance would be completely unmanned, corresponding exactly with the blind spot she had identified earlier. Not an oversight or a trap, but what appeared to be a deliberately engineered vulnerability. Someone inside the security operation was creating an access point, but for whom? Her research was interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps. Ellie quickly closed the screens and pulled up a kindergarten lesson plan just as David Mitchell entered the library. "Working late?" he asked, his tone casual but his eyes sharp with curiosity. "Just finalizing some activities for the children." "During the governor's visit," she replied, her voice betraying none of the adrenaline now coursing through her system. Mitchell leaned against a nearby bookshelf, his posture deliberately relaxed in a way that struck Ellie as performative rather than natural. "You know, I was thinking about your comment in the security briefing yesterday. Not many kindergarten teachers would notice details about security camera coverage." Ellie smiled in the slightly self-deprecating way she had perfected over 4 years of playing her role. "My brother works in building security. I guess I've picked up some of his shop talk over the years." "Must be some brother," Mitchell replied, his eyes never leaving her face. "Reynolds was pretty impressed that you spotted something his team missed. Started asking questions about you." The warning bells in Ellie's mind grew louder. "About me? I'm just a kindergarten teacher." "That's what your personnel file says," Mitchell agreed, pushing himself away from the bookshelf. "Anyway, don't stay too late. Building's being locked down at 8 for another security sweep." As he left, Ellie remained perfectly still, processing the interaction. Mitchell's behavior suggested more than casual curiosity. Someone was asking questions about her, which meant her cover, the identity she had carefully constructed over 4 years, might be at risk. She needed to make a decision, walk away, protect the life she had built, forget what she had discovered. Or investigate further, potentially exposing herself, but possibly preventing whatever was being planned. It wasn't really a choice, not for her. Not with 25 kindergartners and hundreds of other children potentially in danger. Ellie shut down the computer and gathered her belongings, maintaining the appearance of a teacher finishing routine work. But as she walked to her car in the fading evening light, her mind was mapping contingency plans with a methodical precision that had once made her an elite operative. At home, she went directly to her office and reopened the safe. This time, she removed the slim case containing her specialized tools. She hadn't touched them in 4 years, hadn't needed them in the life she had built for herself. Now she laid them out on her desk with the careful attention of someone reconnecting with critical parts of themselves. Laser rangefinder disguised as binoculars. Wind meter camouflaged as a smartphone accessory. Ballistic calculator concealed within what appeared to be a conventional tablet. Ordinary objects to any observer, lethal precision when combined with the skills she had spent years developing. Ellie didn't own weapons anymore. That part of her life was truly behind her. But she didn't need weapons to assess a tactical situation. She didn't need weapons to identify threats and develop countermeasures. She had done more with less in environments far more hostile than an elementary school in suburban America. She spent the next several hours analyzing the information she had gathered, calculating probabilities, and developing potential responses to various scenarios. The pattern was becoming clearer. Someone had engineered a security vulnerability for the upcoming event, most likely to allow unauthorized access during the classified meetings that would take place under the cover of the governor's public appearance. But questions remained. Was it an inside job within the security team? Was someone on the governor's staff compromised? Or was it something larger, a coordinated operation targeting the international delegation? Without more information, she couldn't determine the exact nature of the threat. But she knew enough to recognize that something dangerous was developing, something that placed at risk not just political figures but the children and staff of Pinewood Elementary. The next morning, Ellie arrived at school earlier than usual, projecting the calm demeanor of a teacher preparing for a special event. But her awareness had shifted fully into operational mode, her senses attuned to details that would pass unnoticed by her colleagues. Security personnel were conducting another sweep of the building, their movements professional, but to Ellie's trained eye, somewhat performative. They were following protocols without the heightened alertness that would indicate awareness of a specific threat. She passed Agent Reynolds in the hallway, noting how his eyes tracked her briefly before returning to his tablet. The interest confirmed her suspicions. Someone had flagged her questions about security, marked her as potentially worth monitoring. But the casual nature of his observation suggested she wasn't considered a serious concern. That was their first mistake. Underestimating her had been the downfall of targets before. In her classroom, Ellie went through the motions of preparing for the day, arranging materials and reviewing lessons with the focused efficiency of someone compartmentalizing multiple priorities. When her students began arriving, she welcomed them with genuine warmth, her commitment to their well-being serving as an emotional anchor in the increasingly complex situation. "Miss Morgan, are we really going to meet the governor tomorrow?" asked Tyler, a serious-faced boy with glasses too large for his small features. "We're going to see him speak," Ellie corrected gently. "He'll be very busy, so we'll be watching from our special seats." "Is that why there are so many police at school?" asked Lily, her observant nature catching details that many adults might miss. "They're here to make sure everything goes smoothly for our special visitor," Ellie explained, choosing words that were truthful without being frightening. As the children settled into their morning routine, Ellie maintained her role as their teacher while continuing to gather information. During recess duty, she positioned herself where she could observe the security team conducting perimeter checks. During lunch, she engaged a member of the governor's advance team in casual conversation, extracting details about the schedule that helped complete her understanding of the planned event. By mid-afternoon, as her students worked on art projects, celebrating their state's history, Ellie had compiled enough information to confirm her assessment. The security operation had been compromised. The deliberate gap in coverage wasn't an oversight or a trap. It was an engineered vulnerability, most likely created by someone inside the security team itself. The question was why, and more importantly, what she was going to do about it. The answer came during the final preparation meeting after school hours. Staff gathered in the teacher's lounge to receive last-minute instructions for the following day's event. Agent Reynolds stood at the front of the room, flanked by Principal Harris and a woman Ellie didn't recognize, introduced as Diane Lewis from the governor's office. "As you know," Reynolds began, "tomorrow's visit includes both the public education announcement and a series of private meetings with international delegates. Your responsibility is to ensure that your students remain in designated areas and follow all security protocols." As he continued outlining procedures, Ellie noticed something that sent a chill through her body. Reynolds was wearing a communication earpiece different from the ones used by the rest of his team. A subtle difference. In design, virtually undetectable to anyone without specialized knowledge. But Ellie recognized it immediately. It was a dual-channel system, allowing the wearer to monitor two separate communication networks simultaneously. Standard protocol for coordinating with an external team, or for communicating with someone outside the official security operation. Her suspicions crystallized into certainty. Reynolds wasn't just negligent in addressing the security gap she had identified. He was directly involved in creating it. The head of the governor's security detail was compromised. As the meeting concluded and teachers began dispersing to their classrooms to make final preparations, Ellie approached Principal Harris with a carefully constructed pretext. "I'm a bit concerned about Tyler in my class," she said, referring to the serious-faced boy who had asked about meeting the governor. "He gets anxious in loud, crowded situations. Would it be possible for me to bring my students to see the auditorium set up today, so it won't be overwhelming for him tomorrow?" Harris, distracted by the logistics of the impending visit, nodded. Absently, "Of course, just check with security first. They're being very strict about access." "I will," Ellie promised, having no intention of doing any such thing. Instead, she made her way to her classroom, gathered a few educational materials as a plausible excuse, and then proceeded toward the auditorium using a route that would avoid the main security checkpoints. Her movements were casual but purposeful, projecting the confidence of someone exactly where they were supposed to be. The auditorium was empty except for 2 technicians adjusting the sound system. They glanced at her briefly as she entered, but returned to their work without question. When she held up the teaching materials with a smile that suggested routine preparation. Moving with deliberate casualness, Ellie assessed the room from a professional perspective, noting sight lines, access points, and defensive positions with the automatic calculation of someone who had spent years evaluating similar spaces under far more dangerous circumstances. The stage was set for the governor's announcement, with a podium positioned center stage and seating arranged for dignitaries and special guests. Behind the stage, partially concealed by decorative curtains, was a door leading to a small conference room where the classified meetings would take place. And there it was, the vulnerability that connected directly to the security gap she had identified earlier. From the eastern entrance, through the blind spot in the camera coverage, an unauthorized person could access the backstage area without being detected by the primary security systems. Ellie continued her survey, using her phone to take what appeared to be casual photos of the space where her students would be seated. In reality, she was documenting angles and distances, creating a tactical map of the environment that she would need if her worst fears were realized. As she completed her assessment, Agent Reynolds entered from the backstage area, his expression hardening when he noticed her presence. "Ms. Morgan," he said, his tone professionally neutral but carrying an undercurrent of suspicion. "This area is restricted until tomorrow's event." Ellie adopted the slightly flustered demeanor of a teacher caught bending the rules. "I'm so sorry. Principal Harris said I could bring my students by to see the setup today. I wanted to check the space first to plan how to manage them." Reynolds studied her face, his eyes searching for signs of deception. "All visits need to be cleared through security directly. Please return to your classroom." "Of course," she agreed, moving toward the exit with the appropriate level of embarrassment. "I should have checked the protocols more carefully." As she left, she felt Reynolds watching her, his attention more focused than a minor security violation would typically warrant. She had been right to trust her instincts. Something was very wrong with this operation, and tomorrow it would culminate in whatever had been planned for the governor's visit. Back in her classroom, Ellie continued preparing materials for the following day's activities, maintaining the appearance of a teacher focused on her professional responsibilities. But her mind was elsewhere, processing what she had learned and developing response options. The scenario was becoming clearer. Someone had compromised the head of the governor's security detail. A deliberate vulnerability had been created in what should have been an impenetrable security perimeter. And tomorrow, while the world's attention was focused on a political photo opportunity at an elementary school, something would happen involving the classified meetings taking place behind the scenes. As she arranged colorful name tags for her student seats, Ellie considered her options. She could report her suspicions, but to whom? Reynolds controlled the security operation. Local police would defer to his authority on matters involving the governor. And without concrete evidence, her concerns would likely be dismissed as the overactive imagination of a kindergarten teacher who watched too many thriller movies. She could walk away, protect the life she had built for herself. But that would mean abandoning hundreds of vulnerable children and staff to whatever was being planned. That wasn't a choice she could make, which left only one option, the option she had hoped never to face again. She would need to become the person she had left behind 4 years ago, the person whose skills and training had been developed for precisely this type of situation. The decision made, Ellie completed her classroom preparations with the focused efficiency of someone executing the preliminary stages of an operation. She left the school at the normal time, exchanging pleasant goodbyes with colleagues, giving no indication that anything was different about this particular evening. But as she drove home, her mind had shifted fully into operational planning. She would need equipment, she would need intelligence, and she would need to accept that after tomorrow, the life she had carefully constructed as Ellie Morgan, kindergarten teacher, might no longer exist. At home, she moved with practiced precision, gathering the specialized tools she had hoped never to use again. Not weapons, she had left that part of her life truly behind, but the equipment that had made her one of the most effective counter-snipers in special operations. Equipment that would allow her to identify and neutralize threats before they materialized. She spent hours reviewing the information she had gathered, analyzing building schematics, security rotations, and event timelines. The pattern was clear now, a 3-minute window during the governor's public presentation when the eastern entrance would be completely unmonitored, creating a direct access route to the classified meetings happening backstage. Someone was planning to breach security during that window. Someone connected to Agent Reynolds, who had deliberately engineered the vulnerability despite his responsibility to prevent exactly such weaknesses. As midnight approached, Ellie packed her equipment into an ordinary-looking teacher's tote bag. The same bag she carried every day, now containing tools capable of detecting threats from extraordinary distances. Nothing that would trigger security screenings, nothing obviously suspicious, but everything she would need to identify and respond to whatever was being planned. Tomorrow, while maintaining her cover as a kindergarten teacher responsible for 25 young children, she would also need to counter a security threat that no one else seemed aware of or willing to acknowledge. The question wasn't whether she could do it. Her training and experience had prepared her for far more complex operations. The question was what would remain of her carefully constructed new life when it was over. As she finally prepared for bed, knowing she would need whatever rest she could manage before the coming day, Ellie glanced at the lesson plan still spread across her kitchen table. Plans for teaching 5-year-olds about shapes and colors and the fundamentals of reading. Plans that represented the life she had chosen after walking away from a world of shadows and secrets. Tomorrow those worlds would collide, and the quiet kindergarten teacher who had been dismissed and underestimated by everyone around her would need to become someone else entirely. Someone who had once been among the most lethal precision instruments in her country's arsenal. Someone who had vowed never to return to that life, but some skills never fade. Some responsibilities never truly end. And some threats must be confronted, no matter the personal cost. Ellie Morgan set her alarm for 4:30 a.m., 2 hours earlier than her normal schedule. Tomorrow would require perfect timing, flawless execution, and the kind of focused precision she hadn't needed to call upon in 4 years. The children were counting on their teacher. They just didn't know exactly what their teacher was capable of. The morning of the governor's visit arrived with a crystalline clarity that seemed almost deliberate, as if the universe itself were providing optimal conditions for both a political photo opportunity and whatever darker purpose lay beneath the surface of the day's events. Ellie moved through her apartment with the fluid efficiency of someone whose body remembered precisely what to do, even after years of disuse. Her morning routine appeared ordinary: shower, coffee, professional. attire suitable for a kindergarten teacher on an important school day. But the precision of her movements, the economy of her actions, betrayed a mindset that had nothing to do with preparing lesson plans or managing 5-year-olds. She was operational again. Every gesture calculated, every decision filtered through. Risk assessment and tactical advantage. The tote bag she packed contained exactly what would be expected: lesson materials, student name tags, a small digital camera to document her class participating in a historic school event. But beneath these innocent items lay the specialized tools she had once used to save lives in environments far more hostile than an elementary school. Ellie arrived at Pinewood Elementary at 6:15 a.m., early enough to complete her preparations, but not so early as to trigger suspicion. Several security vehicles were already in the parking lot, and she could see movement inside the building as final arrangements were made for the governor's 10 a.m. arrival. She entered through the main entrance, presenting her identification. With a smile to the security officer stationed there. Her demeanor was calm, her body language projecting nothing beyond mild anticipation for an exciting school day. "Early bird, Ms. Morgan," the officer commented, returning her ID after a cursory check. "Big day," she replied with an appropriate level of enthusiasm. "Lots to prepare before 25 kindergartners meet the governor." Inside, the school had transformed overnight. Additional security personnel patrolled the hallways. Communication equipment had been installed at key positions, and the general atmosphere had shifted from educational to operational. To most of the teachers arriving that morning, it would feel like an exciting disruption to their routine. To Ellie, it was a tactical environment that needed to be navigated with precision. She moved directly to her classroom, closing the door behind her to begin the first phase of her counter-operation. From her tote bag, she removed what appeared to be an ordinary phone charger and plugged it into the wall outlet near her desk. The device would scan for electronic surveillance and alert her to any unauthorized communication frequencies, a passive security measure that wouldn't trigger detection. Next, she positioned what looked like decorative items around her classroom, small, colorful objects that would appear to be part of the festive atmosphere for the governor's visit. In reality, they were passive sensors that would help her monitor movement throughout the building once properly calibrated. As she completed these preparations, Ellie simultaneously arranged the classroom for her students' arrival, creating a seamless blend of her cover activities and her operational requirements. By the time the first kindergartners began arriving, at 7:45 a.m., both aspects of her preparation were complete. "Ms. Morgan, is the governor here yet?" asked Jeremy, a perpetually excited boy with untied shoelaces and a Captain America backpack. "Not yet," Ellie smiled, kneeling to help him with his shoes. "He'll be here at 10 o'clock. We have our regular morning activities first, then we'll go to the auditorium to see him." As the classroom filled with children, Ellie maintained her role perfectly, leading them through their morning routine while simultaneously monitoring the security developments throughout the building. Her sensors picked up increased communication activity near the eastern entrance, the vulnerable point she had identified earlier. "Today is a very special day," she told her class during morning circle time. "We'll be part of an important event, and I need everyone to be on their best behavior. Think of it as a mission, Operation Best Kindergarten Ever." The children giggled at her theatrical tone, but responded enthusiastically to the framing. Ellie had always found that children responded well to structure and purpose, particularly when presented as an adventure rather than a restriction. "What's our mission objective, Ms. Morgan?" asked Tyler, the serious boy with oversized glasses, adopting the formal language with solemn pride. "To show everyone what amazing students you are," she replied. "To stay together, follow directions, and represent Pinewood Elementary with pride." As she guided her students through their morning activities, Ellie maintained situational awareness. Through periodic checks of her phone, which displayed data from the sensors she had positioned around the classroom. At 9:15 a.m., she received the first alert, an unauthorized communication frequency active near the eastern entrance. "Lily, you're our line leader today," she announced, seamlessly transitioning the class toward their next activity. "Everyone line up for our bathroom break before the special assembly." The children formed their practice line, each finding their assigned partner with minimal direction. 4 years of teaching had given Ellie the ability to manage young children with remarkable efficiency, a skill not entirely dissimilar from coordinating tactical operations, though with considerably more hugs and considerably less lethal potential. As they moved through the hallway toward the bathrooms, Ellie observed the increased security presence, noting positions and rotations with automatic assessment. Agent Reynolds passed them, nodding briefly in acknowledgement before continuing toward the auditorium. "Children, very important," Ellie said, gathering her students in a small circle outside the bathrooms. "After our bathroom break, we'll be going directly to the auditorium. Remember our mission: stay with your partner, follow directions, and make Pinewood proud." While her students took turns using the facilities, Ellie checked her phone again. The unauthorized frequency had gone silent, but her sensors indicated unusual movement patterns near the service corridor that connected to the backstage area. The temporal pattern was emerging exactly as she had predicted: preparations for whatever would occur during the 3-minute security gap. By 9:45 a.m., Ellie had positioned her class in their assigned seats at the back of the auditorium. The large space was filling rapidly with older students, teachers, and invited guests. Security personnel maintained positions along the walls and at each entrance, their attention focused primarily on the main doors where the governor would enter. "Ms. Morgan, I can't see the stage very well," complained Hannah, a particularly small girl in the second row of Ellie's group. "That's okay, Hannah," Ellie reassured her. "The important part is that we're all together for this special event. Sometimes being in the back gives us a better view of everything that's happening." The positioning was deliberate. Reynolds had placed her kindergarten class at the maximum distance from both the stage and the eastern entrance, minimizing potential exposure to whatever was being planned. It was the kind of detail that confirmed Ellie's assessment of the situation. As the auditorium filled to capacity, Ellie maintained her dual awareness: attentive teacher supervising 25 excited 5-year-olds, and trained operative monitoring a compromised security environment. Her sensors continued feeding data to her phone, building a comprehensive picture of movement throughout the building. At precisely 10 a.m., Principal Harris approached the podium to announce the governor's arrival. The audience applauded as Governor Williams entered from the main doors, flanked by security personnel and followed by several suited officials who took positions on the stage behind him. Ellie's attention, however, was focused elsewhere. According to her timeline, the 3-minute security gap at the eastern entrance would begin at 10:07 a.m., during the governor's opening remarks. Whatever was being planned would happen then. "I need to use the bathroom," whispered Lily suddenly, tugging at Ellie's sleeve with the urgency unique to kindergartners. Ellie had anticipated this possibility, in fact, had subtly encouraged it by ensuring all her students had finished their morning juice boxes before coming to the auditorium. It provided the perfect pretext for what needed to happen next. "Ms. Adams," she whispered to the teaching assistant seated beside her, "I need to take Lily to the bathroom. Can you watch the others for a few minutes?" The young assistant nodded, focusing her attention on keeping the remaining children quiet as the governor began his speech. Ellie took Lily's hand and led her toward the exit at the back of the auditorium, timing their departure perfectly with the beginning of the security shift rotation. Instead of turning toward the main bathrooms, however, Ellie guided Lily to a smaller restroom near the administrative offices. "Wait right here, sweetie," she said, positioning the child inside the bathroom door. "I'll be right outside." As soon as Lily entered a stall, Ellie moved with startling speed and precision. From her tote bag, she removed what appeared to be an ordinary tablet, but was in fact a sophisticated monitoring device calibrated to the sensors she had placed throughout the building. The display confirmed what she had suspected. The eastern entrance was now completely unmonitored, exactly as planned. Two figures had entered through that vulnerability and were moving along the service corridor toward the backstage area. Based on their movement patterns, they were armed and operating with tactical coordination. Ellie made her decision. She knocked gently on the bathroom door. "Lily, honey, Ms. Adams is coming to help you. I need to check something for Principal Harris. Will you be okay for just a minute?" "Yes, Ms. Morgan," came the trusting reply from inside. Ellie immediately moved toward the eastern corridor, her pace measured but purposeful. To anyone observing, she would appear to be a teacher on an administrative errand, nothing more. But her awareness had shifted fully into operational mode, her senses attuned to details that would pass unnoticed by regular school personnel. The eastern corridor was deserted, exactly as planned in the compromised security rotation. Ellie moved silently along the wall, approaching the junction where the service corridor connected to the backstage area. From her position, she could hear the governor's voice through the auditorium doors, delivering prepared remarks about educational funding and future initiatives. Checking her tablet one final time, she confirmed the position of the two intruders, now stationary in the small room directly behind the stage, where the classified meetings would take place following the public presentation. Their pattern suggested they were setting up equipment, most likely surveillance devices or worse, explosives. Ellie had operated in enough hostile environments to recognize the significance of their positioning. They weren't there to attack the governor during his public appearance. That would be too obvious, too easily prevented. They were targeting the confidential meetings scheduled to occur after the public event, when security would relax slightly and attention would shift away from the school. She needed to act immediately, but with precision. Direct confrontation wasn't an option. She was unarmed by choice, and even if she hadn't been, the risk of gunfire in an elementary school full of children was unacceptable. She needed to neutralize the threat without escalating the situation. Moving with calculated stealth, Ellie approached the service door that led backstage. From her tote bag, she removed what appeared to be a small flashlight, but was actually a non-lethal disorientation device, one of the specialized tools she had hoped never to use again. The door opened silently under her practiced touch. Beyond it, she could see the two intruders, men in maintenance uniforms, that would allow them to blend perfectly with the school's service personnel. They were installing what appeared to be surveillance equipment behind a ventilation panel, their movements displaying the efficient precision of professional operatives. Neither had noticed her entrance, another amateur mistake. In Ellie's former world, lack of perimeter awareness was often fatal. She activated the disorientation device with a subtle movement of her thumb, then tossed it into the room. The small object made barely a sound as it rolled across the floor, coming to rest beneath the table where the men were working. 3 seconds later, it emitted a precisely calibrated pulse of light and sound, imperceptible beyond the immediate area but overwhelming to anyone within its effective radius. Both men reacted instantly, their bodies convulsing as their equilibrium and sensory processing were temporarily, but completely disrupted. Ellie moved immediately, crossing the room before either could recover. With practiced efficiency, she used pressure point techniques to render both men unconscious, their bodies slumping to the floor without struggle or sound. The entire operation had taken less than 30 seconds from entrance to conclusion. Ellie quickly secured the unconscious intruders using zip ties from her bag, then examined the equipment they had been installing. As she suspected, it was a fuzzy, sophisticated surveillance package designed to record the classified discussions scheduled to occur in this room after the public event. But there was something else. A small device attached to the ventilation system that her trained eye immediately recognized as a delivery mechanism for an airborne agent. Not explosives as she had feared, but something potentially more insidious, a compound designed to incapacitate everyone in the room during the sensitive discussions. Ellie carefully disabled both the surveillance equipment and the chemical delivery device, ensuring they couldn't be remotely activated. Only then did she turn her attention to the next phase of her response, determining who had compromised the security operation and why. The answer was in the communication devices carried by the unconscious intruders. Each had a specialized earpiece identical to the one she had noticed, Agent Reynolds wearing confirmation of his involvement in whatever was being planned. Ellie checked her watch. The governor's speech would continue for approximately 7 more minutes, followed by a brief photo opportunity with students and staff. The security rotation would reset in less than 2 minutes, returning coverage to the eastern entrance. She needed to act quickly. Using one of the intruders' communication devices, she monitored the security channel, confirming that Reynolds was still positioned near the stage. His involvement created a complex problem. He controlled the entire security operation, which meant she couldn't simply report what she had discovered. He would ensure it was dismissed or worse, turned against her. She needed leverage, something that would force immediate action from authorities Reynolds couldn't control. The unconscious intruders and their equipment provided exactly that leverage. Ellie took photographs of the men, their equipment, and the chemical delivery device, ensuring the images clearly documented what had been planned. Then, using her own phone, she composed a message with those images attached. The recipient wasn't local law enforcement or school administration. Both could be delayed or misdirected by Reynolds. Instead, she sent it to a number she had memorized years ago during her former career. A direct line to federal authorities who specialized in exactly this type of threat. The message was brief, precise, and contained authentication codes that would immediately verify its legitimacy. Counter-sniper authentication 7 Delta Echo. Compromised security operation at Pinewood Elementary School. Governor's security chief involved. 2 hostile operatives neutralized. Chemical agent interdicted. Immediate response required. She pressed send, knowing that the response would be swift and unequivocal. Within minutes, federal tactical teams would be mobilizing. The challenge now was managing the situation until they arrived, keeping the children safe, preventing Reynolds from realizing his operation had been compromised, and ensuring the incapacitated intruders remained secured. Ellie quickly arranged the unconscious men in a storage closet, positioning them to ensure they wouldn't regain mobility even if they regained consciousness. She secured the door with a maintenance lock, then gathered her equipment and prepared to return to her role as kindergarten teacher. Before leaving, she carefully examined the room one final time, ensuring no trace of the confrontation remained visible. The surveillance equipment and chemical device were now secured in her tote bag, to be handed over to federal authorities when they arrived. As she exited through the service door, Ellie's phone vibrated with an incoming message, confirmation that her alert had been received and assets were being deployed. Estimated arrival time, 12 minutes. She needed to maintain her cover for just a little longer, keeping her students safe while preventing Reynolds from realizing something had gone wrong with his operation. The timing would be tight, but precision timing had always been her specialty. Returning to the bathroom where she had left Lily, Ellie found Ms. Adams waiting outside the door with the young girl. "There you are, Ms. Morgan," the teaching assistant said with obvious relief. "Principal Harris was looking for you. They want your class to come forward for photos with the governor in about 5 minutes." Ellie processed this information immediately. The request would place her students directly in the vicinity of Agent Reynolds during the very moment when he would be expecting confirmation from his compromised operatives. The timing couldn't be worse. Actually, she said, thinking quickly, Tyler wasn't feeling well when we left the auditorium. I think several of our students might be coming down with something. Perhaps we should skip the photo opportunity. Ms. Adams looked concerned. Oh dear. Should I tell Principal Harris? Let me handle it, Ellie replied smoothly. You take Lily back to our seats. I'll speak with the principal directly. As the teaching assistant led Lily back toward the auditorium, Ellie moved in the opposite direction, approaching the stage area through a side corridor that would allow her to observe without being immediately visible to Reynolds. Through the partially open door, she could see the governor concluding his remarks to enthusiastic applause. Principal Harris stood nearby, preparing to invite selected classes forward for the planned photo opportunity. And there was Reynolds, his hand pressed to his earpiece, his expression gradually transforming from professional neutrality to barely concealed concern. He was expecting confirmation from his operatives, confirmation that would never come. Ellie watched as Reynolds subtly checked his phone, then whispered something to another security officer. The man immediately left the auditorium, heading in the direction of the eastern entrance. Reynolds was initiating a check on his compromised operation. Time was running out. Federal response teams were still minutes away, and Reynolds was already moving to determine what had gone wrong. If he realized his operatives had been neutralized, the situation could escalate dramatically. Ellie needed to contain him without creating panic or endangering the children. She needed to isolate him from the rest of the security team, prevent him from implementing whatever contingency plan he had prepared. And she needed to do it all while maintaining her cover as a kindergarten teacher. The solution came from an unexpected source. As Principal Harris began calling classes forward for photos, Ellie saw her opportunity. She stepped into the auditorium and approached the principal with the calm professionalism she had cultivated over 4 years of teaching. Principal Harris, she said quietly, I need to speak with you and Agent Reynolds immediately. It's regarding a security matter. Harris looked startled by the unusual request, but responded to the authority in Ellie's voice. Of course, Ms. Morgan. Let me just finish the photo arrangements. Now please, Ellie insisted, allowing a hint of urgency to enter her tone. It's extremely time-sensitive. Something in her expression must have conveyed the seriousness of the situation, because Harris immediately nodded and gestured toward a small conference room adjacent to the stage. We can speak in there. I'll get Agent Reynolds. As Harris moved to retrieve the security chief, Ellie positioned herself in the conference room doorway, ensuring she had clear sight lines to both the auditorium and the eastern corridor. Her sensors indicated movement. The security officer Reynolds had dispatched was discovering that something had gone very wrong. Reynolds approached with Harris, his expression professionally neutral, but his body language betraying heightened alertness. He had clearly received some indication that his operation was compromised. Principal Harris said you needed to discuss a security matter? He asked as they entered the conference room, his tone carefully controlled. Ellie closed the door behind them, then turned to face Reynolds directly. In that moment, she allowed her carefully maintained persona to fall away completely. Her posture shifted, her expression hardened, and she spoke in a voice that belonged to someone Principal Harris had never met. Your operatives have been neutralized, she said flatly. The surveillance equipment and chemical delivery device have been disabled. Federal response teams will be here in approximately 7 minutes. The transformation was so complete, so unexpected, that both Harris and Reynolds froze momentarily in shock. Harris looked bewildered, unable to reconcile the kindergarten teacher she had known for 4 years with the woman now standing before her. Reynolds recovered more quickly, his hand moving toward his weapon. I wouldn't, Ellie said quietly. Specialized counter-sniper authentication codes tend to trigger priority responses. The building is already being surrounded. Your exit routes are compromised, and I've been recording this entire conversation. Reynolds's hand stopped. His eyes narrowed as he reassessed the woman before him, no longer a kindergarten teacher. To be dismissed, but a threat he hadn't anticipated and clearly didn't understand. "Who are you?" he asked, tension evident in every syllable. Ellie smiled slightly, the expression carrying none of the warmth she showed her students. "Just a kindergarten teacher who noticed a gap in your security coverage. What is happening here?" Principal Harris asked, her voice rising with confusion and alarm. "Ms. Morgan, what are you talking about?" "Agent Reynolds compromised security for the governor's visit," Ellie explained, never taking her eyes off the man. "He created a deliberate vulnerability that allowed unauthorized access to the meeting room where classified discussions were scheduled to take place." Reynolds's expression confirmed her assessment, though he made no verbal admission. His body tensed, calculating options that were rapidly diminishing as federal response time decreased. "That's absurd," he said finally. "This woman is clearly unstable." "Principal Harris, I need to place her in custody until we can assess." He was interrupted by the sound of his communication device, now broadcasting on speaker mode, a breach of protocol that indicated someone had remotely overridden its security settings. "All security personnel, this is Federal Special Agent Davis. We are assuming control of this operation effective immediately. Agent Reynolds is to be considered compromised and potentially hostile. All other security staff should remain in position and await further instructions." The timing was perfect, exactly what Ellie had been counting on when she sent her authenticated alert. Federal authorities had mobilized with the efficiency she remembered from her former career, moving to contain the situation before it could escalate further. Reynolds's face hardened as he realized the extent of his exposure. His hand moved again, this time more decisively toward his weapon. But Ellie had anticipated this reaction, had counted on it, in fact. Before his fingers could close around the grip of his gun, she moved with the fluid precision that had once made her one of the most effective operatives in her field. A single strike to a nerve cluster in his shoulder rendered his arm temporarily useless. A follow-up movement relieved him of his weapon, and a precisely applied pressure technique brought him to his knees, controlled but not injured. The entire sequence took less than 2 seconds. Principal Harris hadn't even had time to scream. "Federal agents will be here momentarily," Ellie said calmly, maintaining control of Reynolds with seemingly minimal effort. "Principal Harris, I need you to return to the auditorium and ensure the children remain calm. Tell the governor's legitimate security team that there's been a minor issue that's being handled." Harris stared at her, shock evident in every feature. "Who are you?" she whispered, echoing Reynolds's question. Ellie's expression softened slightly. "Exactly who I've always been, a teacher who cares about her students' safety." Then more firmly, "Please, Teresa, the children need you to keep things normal right now." The use of her first name seemed to break through Harris's shock. She nodded uncertainly, then moved toward the door with a final bewildered glance at the kindergarten teacher who had just neutralized a trained security agent with terrifying efficiency. As the door closed behind the principal, Ellie returned her full attention to Reynolds, who was glaring at her with a mixture of pain and frustrated rage. "You have no idea what you've interfered with," he hissed. "This was a sanctioned operation. When my superiors, your superiors will be very interested in explaining why a sanctioned operation involved an unregistered chemical agent," Ellie interrupted, "and why it was necessary to compromise the governor's security to gather intelligence. That could have been obtained through legal channels." Reynolds's expression confirmed her assessment. Whatever he had been involved in, it wasn't officially sanctioned, at least not through any legitimate authority. The door opened, admitting 2 men in tactical gear, their weapons at the ready, but pointed safely downward. The lead agent took in the scene with professional assessment, then nodded to Ellie with what might have been respect. "Counter-sniper authentication confirmed," he said. We have the building secured and the governor protected. Status report? Ellie responded with the precise, information-dense briefing style of someone accustomed to high-pressure operational communications. 2 hostiles neutralized in the backstage storage room. Surveillance equipment and chemical delivery device secured in my possession. Primary suspect contained and disarmed. No casualties, no public awareness. The agent nodded again, clearly recognizing that whoever this kindergarten teacher might appear to be, she was something else entirely. We'll take it from here. The response team will extract all hostiles through the service entrance to avoid disrupting the public event. The children shouldn't see any of this, Ellie said, her tone making it clear this was non-negotiable. Understood. Clean extraction only. The agent gestured to his partner, who moved forward to take control of Reynolds. Ma'am, we'll need a full debrief when the situation is contained. Ellie released Reynolds into the agent's custody, then retrieved her tote bag containing the seized equipment. I'll be available after I ensure my students are safe and supervised. The agent looked momentarily surprised, as if he'd forgotten she actually was a kindergarten teacher with actual students to attend to. Then he nodded with what definitely was respect. Yes, ma'am. We'll be in touch. As federal agents took control of the situation, Ellie straightened her clothing, composed her expression, and prepared to return to her class. The transition back to kindergarten teacher would be challenging after what had just occurred, but she had performed more difficult role shifts in her previous career. For a moment, standing alone in the conference room, she allowed herself to acknowledge what she had done, the skills she had called upon, the instincts she had trusted, the past she had temporarily reclaimed. She had neutralized a genuine threat, protected hundreds of children, and prevented what could have been a diplomatic disaster. And she had done it all without anyone, except those who absolutely needed to know, discovering who she really was. It was time to return to her students. They would be wondering where their teacher had gone. The quiet kindergarten teacher with the simple tote bag and sensible shoes walked calmly back toward the auditorium, leaving behind the counter sniper, who had just reminded a few select individuals exactly what she was capable of when the situation demanded it. Some skills never fade, some responsibilities never end, and some people are never truly who they appear to be. The conference room inside the federal building hummed with the focused energy that came from gathering intelligence professionals with a common purpose. Multiple screens displayed surveillance footage, communication transcripts, and background profiles while analysts moved between stations with the quiet efficiency of people accustomed to handling classified information. Ellie sat at the central table, her posture relaxed but alert, answering questions with the precise clarity of someone who had prepared countless operational briefs. Gone was the kindergarten teacher's cardigan and sensible shoes, replaced by the professional attire of someone attending a high-level security meeting. Yet something of her classroom demeanor remained, a patience and thoughtfulness that might not have been part of her communication style 8 years ago. Around her, federal agents and intelligence officers moved with practiced purpose, processing the information she had provided about the thwarted operation at Pinewood Elementary. What had begun as a debriefing had evolved into something more comprehensive as the full scope of Reynolds' activities became apparent. To confirm your assessment, said Special Agent Diane Foster, the lead investigator assigned to the case, you identified the security vulnerability based solely on visual observation of the camera positioning. The initial observation raised concerns, Ellie replied, but confirmation came from pattern recognition. The deliberate gap in coverage, combined with the modified security rotation and Reynolds' non-standard communication equipment, suggested an engineered vulnerability, rather than an oversight. Foster nodded, making notes on her tablet. She was a sharp-featured woman with the focused intensity of someone who had built her career on precision and thoroughness. And you recognize the pattern because I've seen it before. Ellie finished simply. in operations that were designed to appear secure while actually containing controlled access points. The unspoken question hung in the air. Who exactly was this kindergarten teacher who could identify sophisticated security breaches, neutralize trained operatives, and communicate in the specialized language of covert operations? The question had been hovering at the edges of the debriefing for the past 2 hours, carefully avoided but increasingly unavoidable. Director Michael Chen, who had been observing silently from the corner of the room, finally approached the table. His presence had shifted the energy when he arrived 30 minutes into the debriefing, a recognition by everyone present that whatever had happened at Pinewood Elementary was significant enough to warrant attention from the highest levels. "Ms. Morgan," he said, his voice carrying the measured authority of someone accustomed to handling sensitive information, "your actions today prevented what could have been a serious diplomatic incident. The intelligence you secured is already providing valuable insights into a network we've been tracking for some time." Ellie acknowledged the statement with a slight nod, waiting for the question that would inevitably follow. "However," Chen continued, "your background file contains some inconsistencies that complicate our assessment of today's events." The room grew quieter as personnel sensed they were approaching the heart of the matter. Foster set down her tablet, her full attention now focused on Ellie's response. "My credentials as a kindergarten teacher are legitimate," Ellie said carefully. "I completed my education degree 5 years ago and have been teaching at Pinewood Elementary for 4 years. My performance reviews and professional development records are consistent with those of any dedicated educator." "That's not the inconsistency I'm referring to," Chun replied. "Prior to your teaching career, your file shows 3 years of administrative work with a private security consulting firm, preceded by nothing, no military service, no intelligence background, no specialized training that would explain the skills you demonstrated today." Ellie smiled slightly, the expression containing a complexity that didn't belong on a kindergarten teacher's face. "Director, we both know there are individuals whose service records are not accessible through standard channels." Chun studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he turned to the room at large. "I need the room cleared, please." "Classified debriefing protocol, authorization level 7. The response was immediate. Personnel gathered materials, secured workstations, and exited with the efficiency of people accustomed to handling sensitive information. Within 30 seconds, only Chun, Foster, and Ellie remained in the conference room. "Authentication protocol Delta 7 Whiskey," Chun said once the room was secure. Ellie's posture shifted subtly, a reflexive response to words she hadn't heard in years. "Counter-sniper unit designation Echo 43. Operational period 2012 to 2017. Authorization code Blackbird November Echo 9. Foster's eyes widened slightly, the first crack in her professional composure since the debriefing began. Chun's expression remained neutral, but something in his bearing suggested confirmation of suspicion rather than surprise. "Your record was sealed at the highest levels," he said, taking a seat across from her. "Not redacted or classified, completely removed from all accessible systems. There are fewer than 5 people in the entire intelligence community with clearance to know you existed." "That was the agreement," Ellie replied simply. "For those of us not among the 5, Foster interjected, her tone carefully professional despite obvious curiosity. "Would you clarify exactly what your role was?" Ellie considered the question, weighing operational security against the practical reality that her actions at Pinewood Elementary had already compromised the total anonymity she had maintained for 4 years. "I was part of a specialized counter-sniper unit," she said finally. "We operated in environments where conventional security measures were insufficient or compromised. Our primary function was identification and neutralization of high-level threats before they materialized." "Neutralization," Foster repeated, the euphemism hanging in the air between them. Precisely targeted intervention, Ellie clarified. Sometimes lethal, more often not. The objective was threat elimination with minimal collateral impact. Chun nodded, the explanation aligning with whatever limited information he had access to. Your unit was disbanded in 2017. According to the fragments that remain in secure archives, all personnel were reassigned to conventional roles or transitioned to civilian status. That's correct. Yet none of your former colleagues responded to a security situation by becoming kindergarten teachers, Chun observed, a hint of dry humor entering his tone. Ellie smiled, genuine warmth breaking through her operational demeanor. Everyone finds their own way forward, Director. I found mine in a kindergarten classroom, teaching 5-year-olds after spending years in counter-terrorism operations. Foster said, not quite managing to keep the disbelief from her voice. That's an unusual career transition. Is it? Ellie asked. Both roles require hyper-awareness of your environment. Both demand the ability to anticipate problems before they develop. Both involve managing unpredictable individuals with limited impulse control. Her smile widened slightly. The primary difference is that kindergartners are generally more reasonable during negotiations. The response broke the tension in the room, drawing reluctant smiles from both Chin and Foster. But the central question remained unaddressed. What happened next? Ellie's carefully constructed civilian identity had been compromised, at least within the intelligence community. Her extraordinary actions at Pinewood Elementary couldn't simply be filed away and forgotten. The immediate situation has been contained, Chun said, returning to his professional demeanor. Reynolds is in custody, along with his associates. The surveillance equipment and chemical agent have been secured and are being analyzed. None of the children or staff at Pinewood Elementary were aware of the security breach or its resolution. And the governor's visit proceeded as planned, Foster added. The classified meetings with the international delegation were relocated to a secure facility as a precautionary measure without raising suspicion. What's the cover story for Reynolds? Ellie asked, the question reflecting her understanding of how such situations were typically managed. Medical emergency, Chun replied. He was discreetly removed from the security detail due to unexpected health concerns. The public narrative is simple and unremarkable. Ellie nodded, satisfied with the approach. It was clean, believable, and protected both the operation and the civilians at Pinewood Elementary from unnecessary disruption. Which brings us to you, Miss Morgan, Chun continued. Your situation presents certain complications. My cover is compromised, Ellie stated flatly, addressing the issue directly. Within this operation, yes, Chun acknowledged. But the compromise is contained to essential personnel with appropriate clearance. There has been no public exposure. Principal Harris saw me neutralize Reynolds, Ellie pointed out. That's not something typically included in kindergarten teacher certification. Foster consulted her tablet. Principal Harris has been debriefed. She's been given a modified explanation involving your participation in a confidential security program for educators. Her cooperation has been secured through a combination of appeals to national security and her obvious concern for student safety. She believes you were part of a pilot program training selected school personnel to respond to security threats, Chun elaborated. Given recent concerns about school safety, it's a plausible explanation that aligns with current educational security initiatives. Ellie processed this information, analyzing its implications with the methodical thoroughness that had once made her an exceptional operative. And my students, my colleagues? They remain unaware of anything unusual, Foster assured her. As far as they know, you were simply assisting with a minor logistical issue during the governor's visit. Your direct involvement in the security operation has been completely contained. The relief was visible in Ellie's expression, a genuine emotional response breaking through her professional composure. Her concern for her students wasn't part of a cover identity or operational role. It was authentic in a way that surprised both Chun and Foster. "You actually care about them," Chun observed, a note of realization in his voice. "This isn't just a cover assignment for you." "They're my students," Ellie replied simply, as if that explained everything. And perhaps it did. Chun exchanged a glance with Foster, some unspoken communication passing between them. Then he leaned forward, his expression serious but not unkind. "Ms. Morgan, given your unique background and the skills you demonstrated today, there are several agencies that would be extremely interested in recruiting you for active operational roles. Your former unit may have been disbanded, but your expertise remains highly valuable." Ellie had been expecting this approach. It was the logical response to discovering that someone with her specialized training was currently teaching alphabet songs to 5-year-olds. "I appreciate the consideration, Director," she said carefully, "but I left that life for specific reasons. Those reasons haven't changed." "May I ask what those reasons were?" Foster inquired, her tone suggesting genuine curiosity rather than professional assessment. Ellie was silent for a moment, considering how much to reveal. These people weren't her confidants or friends. They were intelligence professionals, evaluating an asset. Yet something about the day's events, about returning briefly to the person she had once been, made her willing to offer at least a partial explanation. "My final operation involved the school," she said finally. "Not unlike Pinewood Elementary. There was a threat, a sophisticated one, similar in some ways to what Reynolds was attempting. We identified it, tracked it, prepared to neutralize it." She paused, the memory clearly still vivid despite the years that had passed. Something went wrong. Intelligence was incomplete. Timing was compromised. What should have been a clean operation became messy. "We contained the threat, but not before there were civilian casualties. Children." The conference room was silent except for the soft hum of the ventilation system. Neither Chun nor Foster interrupted, recognizing the weight of what was being shared. "Afterward, during the operational review, I realized something," Ellie continued. "We had been so focused on eliminating the threat that we'd lost sight of what we were actually protecting. We'd become so specialized, so removed from ordinary life, that we had started to see the civilians we were supposed to be protecting as abstract concepts rather than real people." She looked directly at Chun, her gaze unwavering. "I decided then that I needed to reconnect with what we were fighting for, to remember what normal life looked like, to build something instead of simply preventing destruction." "So you became a teacher," Foster said softly, understanding dawning in her expression. "I became a teacher," Ellie confirmed. "Not as cover, not as an assignment, but as a genuine redirection of my skills and energy. Those 25 kindergartners aren't props in an operational scenario. They're individual children with names and personalities and futures that I'm helping to shape." Chun studied her for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. "And yet, when the situation demanded it, you didn't hesitate to return to your previous skill set. You identified the threat, developed a response plan, and executed it with precision." "Some training never fades," Ellie acknowledged. "Some responsibilities never really end." "Which brings us back to our current situation," Chun said. "Your cover hasn't been publicly compromised, but within certain circles, your existence has been confirmed. That creates operational security concerns that need to be addressed." The implication was clear now that they knew who she was. Now that her extraordinary capabilities had been demonstrated, they couldn't simply allow her to return to teaching kindergarten as if nothing had happened. The intelligence community didn't work that way. "What are you proposing, Director?" Ellie asked directly. Chun glanced at Foster, who nodded slightly, some predetermined agreement being activated. "A compromise. You maintain your position. At Pinewood Elementary, continuing the life you've chosen for yourself. But you also serve as a specialized consultant for selected operations that match your unique skill set. Define specialized consultant, Ellie said, her tone making it clear she wouldn't accept vague terminology. Advisory capacity only, Chun specified. Threat assessment, security analysis, training consultation. No field operations, no direct intervention unless you specifically choose to engage. Your primary identity as a teacher remains intact and takes priority. Ellie considered the offer, weighing it against her determination to leave her former life behind. It wasn't what she had planned when she'd walked away from counter-terrorism operations 4 years ago. But then, she hadn't planned on encountering a sophisticated security threat at an elementary school either. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.